Texas law is very clear that an indictment is not any evidence that a person is actually guilty of the crime they're charged of. So if a case goes all the way to trial, the judge will always instruct the jurors on the law, which is you're not allowed to consider the fact that a person has been indicted and charged with a crime as any evidence of guilt whatsoever. Some people don't fully understand this. You trial lawyers like me hear people in jury selection say, well, I mean, the police wouldn't have charged him, the prosecutor wouldn't have brought this case if he didn't do something, so, I think that's some evidence of guilt. And there's some really good reasons why the law is what it is. So let's talk about that for just a second. First of all, an indictment comes from a grand jury. A grand jury is a group of people who are impaneled to hear only the prosecutor's side of the evidence, generally, and only really a summary of the evidence. They generally don't go in depth because they have to hear every case, every felony case that's being presented. And so they hear a quick summary of the evidence, and their job is to determine, based on hearing usually only the prosecutor's side, is there enough evidence for the case to move forward to court? Now that burden, that hurdle they have to get over is only probable cause, right? So it's not way up at the top, the legal burden being beyond a reasonable doubt in order to find someone guilty. So, put simply, the grand jury is a one-sided affair, right? They generally only hear the prosecutor's side of the story, as opposed to a jury trial. They have the opportunity to hear both sides, to hear the full story. A grand jury generally only hears a summary of the evidence. They're not going to hear, often they don't even hear live testimony. They just hear summary of what witnesses told or what the detective determined during their investigation. Whereas in a jury trial, they're going to hear live testimony. They're going to hear the witness's own words. They're going to hear all of that, not in a summary form. In a grand jury, the defense doesn't get to participate. If they're allowed to participate at all, it's by submitting like a written letter. They certainly don't get to cross-examine witnesses. So, the jurors, the grand jurors, don't get to hear a full, statement from the witness and hear them cross-examined so that they can really determine their credibility. Whereas in a jury trial, both sides get to cross-examine any witnesses the other side puts up. Like I said, in a grand jury, only the prosecutor generally puts forward evidence, whereas in a jury trial, the defense has the opportunity not only to cross-examine the government's evidence, but to put on its own evidence, its own witnesses, that both sides then get to cross-examine each other's witnesses. So the idea is a grand jury indicts a case based on, a summary, a one-sided picture, and not a full detailed picture. Whereas a jury in a trial is able to see all the evidence, is able to look at it carefully, is able to hear the full story. And then the final thing is, grand jurors just have to be qualified voters. They're not vetted through a process where the judge and both lawyers, the lawyer for the government, the lawyer for the defense, get to explain the law and ask if they can follow that law. Whereas in a jury trial, you go through jury selection and the lawyers get to determine, here's what the law is that pertains to this case. Is that something you're going to be able to follow? Right? So in a jury trial, we ensure that the jurors understand and agree to follow the law. Whereas in a grand jury, you can just think, I think anyone accused is guilty. And technically, that's fine. That is why it is completely the law of the land and completely, now that you kind of understand the full picture, kind of common sense why an indictment is not evidence of a crime and can't be considered evidence that a crime has been committed, that a person is guilty whatsoever.